So welcome everyone to our second Barichara Regenerative Finance Lab session, which is our 28th Barichara update, because those were things that were happening before. And what I want to say is today and the first session we did 2 weeks ago are going to be more of me kind of providing context setting and less of us actively designing together, because I feel like there's just a lot of sharing of what's going on that will help us to do design, build, practice together. We will have some design build conversation today, but I really want to spend some more time mapping, literally mapping places into the landscape for you to see some of what we're doing with place-based initiatives in Barichara, how those place-based initiatives connect to the learning ecosystem, and how they're part of the Barichara Regenerative Education Fund. So as you can already hear just with those words, what we're doing is pretty complex. And so for you to see it better and have a better shared understanding of it will help us to practice bringing things into being with what is happening. And today I'm going to spend more time talking about a new piece of land that we just purchased, a new organization that we just got the statutes sent to us from a lawyer yesterday that we're reviewing to create another nonprofit organization in Barichara. I'm learning a lot about Colombian legal frameworks. For those who don't know, Colombia has some of the best laws, the way that they're written for sustainable development, but there's terrible implementation and enforcement. And so Colombia rewrote their constitution right after the Rio Earth Conference in 1992, and they gave 24% of the land to indigenous people, which is more ambitious than any other country on earth. And that's exactly where they have the highest per capita indigenous and environmental leader assassination rate, as you go into the ancestral lands of indigenous people, and mining companies hire thugs to kill people. So you end up with this very paradoxical situation in Colombia of amazing legal frameworks and very weak institutions. And so it's really an interesting dance creating institutions in Colombia. But anyway, we'll talk a little bit about one of the legal frameworks that we're creating today that blends some of those elements. But the main focus for today is going to be talking about the Regenerative Education Fund as it relates to an ecosystem of projects. And we're going to focus more on the place-based element, which is, here's a place where something is happening. Here's a place where something is happening. Here's the relationship between them, and you can see them as landscape processes, so that we can start to explore how we build a funding support system for this, and what kinds of capital, not only money, what kinds of capital can move in this space, so that we can really get good at doing this and bring this learning to the bioregional funding ecosystem work that'll be in Ontario, in Cascadia, and in the Northeast Forest of North America that we're going to start doing later this year. So we're going to create those relationships. As well as this week, I was doing a lot of work on the Northern Andes Regeneration Fund that is going to directly support regenerative work in Putumayo, which is down in southern Colombia, in the savannas of Bogota, in kind of south central Colombia, and here in Barichara, as part of the movement of territorial foundations. So there's like work happening at multiple levels. And you're going to see just in Barichara, there's also work happening at multiple levels. So what I want to do is give a presentation that's probably going to take about 30 minutes, 20, 30 minutes. And then we'll have lots of time for discussion about what do we do with this, and how can we start to organize this particular group. How can we start to organize into work groups? How can we organize into action? How can we support each other in this work? And how can we bring this work to other places that need to learn about it? Because I think what we're doing is highly teachable for other landscapes. So does that sound like a good agenda? Any questions before we start? Cool, then let's do it. So I'm really excited because we have just a lot of stuff going on. Here we go. So I'm going to come over here. So today is the Education Fund for Barichara. There is a picture of the Sueños del Bosque sign, the school, the Waldorf school that we created earlier this year. We'll talk about the location of that school as part of our conversation today. And like I said, what I really want to emphasize is the Regenerative Education Fund. This is how we talked about it 2 weeks ago, was that the Regenerative Education Fund was going to support the work of Bioparque Moncora, which is a community reforestation project owned by a local nonprofit that's a member-based organization called the Asociación Aquileopara. It's an organization with 40 members that has been around for about half a century. And then there was Sueños del Bosque, the Waldorf School, and the community activities associated with it. And then last time we talked about Origen del Agua, the nature reserve and reforestation project that's right beside a campesino school out in the country. And that has a lot of blending of education and ecosystem restoration. And so before we talked about how we wanted to raise funds for 2025, that we wanted to focus on raising $100,000 and fund all 3 projects for a year. But we're going to add 3 more elements to that today. We're going to talk about Totumo, this place called Las Ruinas, the ruins, and Tierra Sagrada, the sacred land or sacred earth, which is the new nonprofit that we're creating. And basically, I just want to say that things have evolved a lot in the last 2 weeks. We actually need to raise even more money. We have more powerful things we need to do. We've updated our budgets. We're actually bringing about $200,000 into Barichara this year. Only a small part of it is going to education, and it's already allocated in existing budgets that is not included in the amount of money we need to raise. So we're in a process where there's a huge amount that's going on in the territory. And that's why these webs of mycelial connection, these relationships to other things become more important week to week as things continually change. And so one of the things that's happened is we've brought more land into the process. And so I just want to show you on a map where the different land projects are, because then you can start to see them. So right here in the bottom middle is the town of Barichara. You can see it sitting on the edge of a cliff. There's a highway that goes down the cliffside below it. And at the top of the town is Bioparque Moncora, this 6-hectare community project that was started in 2009. So it's 15 years old. And right next to it in orange is a place called Las Ruinas, which used to be a house that is now eroded away into a couple of mounds of dirt because it was earthen construction for the house. And we see Las Ruinas as the long-term future home of the school, Sueños del Bosque. But if you look way up in the upper right, there's a place called the Maloca. Maloca is actually a kind of traditional housing for people in the Amazon. So it's not traditional to Santander, to the area around Barichara, but it's a kind of thatched roof construction. And someone built this beautiful Maloca space. And the Maloca is where Sueños del Bosque is happening right now. The current temporary home is that we're renting the Maloca to have the school there. But in the long term, we want to build relationships with Las Ruinas and move the school there so that the school is on the edge of town and that it's connected to the Bioparque. So you can start to see some of the landscape connections. And then Origen del Agua, the land that we bought with crowdfunding money in 2020, and that we started doing reforestation and watershed restoration work in 2021, is up at the top of the ridgeline here in the top of this image. And then Totumo, which is the land that Penny and I just signed the deed for yesterday, is in one of the drainages, what in Spanish is called a microcuenca, or a stream bed that is down below the town in the countryside. And so we see Totumo as a place, because it's already got a lot of school infrastructure on the land, that it could be a place to connect with campesinos and things that are happening in the more rural parts of the territory. So here you can start to see these are only a few of the projects that are part of our regenerative work in Barichara, but these are all projects that are directly connected to what we're going to talk about today. And they're all directly connected to the Regenerative Education Fund right now. And so I want to start with El Totumo. So this is a picture of Totumo. It's on a piece of land that's actually pretty small. I'll show you an aerial shot, a photo that I took with our drone a couple of days ago, so you can see it from above. It's only about an acre or a half a hectare. It's 3,000 square meters. So it's really pretty small. but it's got really beautiful infrastructure. And part of the story is that there was this couple, Rodrigo and Ana Malena. They bought this land in 2015 when it had almost no trees and no buildings on it. And then they invested their money in building a community school, which they called El Totumo. And the totumo is a native tree in this region. And this that you can see in this picture, that's the community kitchen and an outdoor classroom. And that community kitchen has an industrial oven, an industrial stove. Rodrigo and Ana Malena donated those things to us. And they gave us a beautiful discounted price. They took 50 million pesos, or about $15,000 off the price of the land to sell it to us because they really wanted it to remain in the community. And so this is one of the buildings that's on the land. And we're already talking with some local people about opening the community kitchen for workshops. Penny and I are going to start buying materials to have like a really good blender and mixer and plates and cups and servingware and things so that people can actually do community cooking projects in addition to activities with children using this building. But then also there's like, it's like an abandoned school. There's swing sets, there's a tree house, there's a dry toilet, a composting toilet. There's just lots of stuff that they built over the years. That's my daughter Elise there in the middle, getting ready to climb up to the tree house.
Zip line.
Yeah, there's actually a zip line between the tree house and a tree. They built all these cool things for the kids to play outdoors. So it's kind of an outdoor playground, plus classrooms that are indoor and classrooms that are outdoor, and an industrial community kitchen, and a building that can function as a house. So Penny, Elise, and I are going to live there, and we're going to make this space available to the community. We're talking about working with the Centropic agroforestry work in Barichara to pay for putting in place a Centropic agroforestry, like a food forest system that can connect with the local community. We're planning a big event in August because Penny and I are about to do some travel. That'll really create a dynamic engagement on this land. And families brought their kids here over the last 9 years. My daughter went to school here for 3 years. So she's really excited to live in the space that was her school before, and then go to another school in a different part of the territory. So you can sort of feel the potential that this land represents for creating dynamics with, outside people coming and doing an immersion and coming and using this space, local people doing community events. Actually, we're talking about creating a campesino school, because the school in this part of the territory is really poor and has a bad teacher, and the parents have stopped sending their kids there. So this part of the territory doesn't have a functioning public school. So we might end up creating an alternative school for the local people. That's an alternative to the public school because we could do something better. We're basically just dreaming up a lot of ideas, and we're going to start talking with the community in August about how to activate it all. But Totumo is a powerful place from which to dream of regenerative education for the whole territory. Here's a view from a shot I took on with our drone the other day. So you can see it's a pretty small piece of land. It's actually in the drainage of the watershed. The watershed runs right beside the property. The land has 3 buildings on it. You can only see 2 of them here. The community kitchen is the biggest one that you see there in the middle. Down in the bottom is the place that's going to be our home. And we might also have some space there for like community classrooms. We're not quite sure how we're going to use it all. And then in the upper right, underneath that tree, is a classroom, another building that you can't see in this image. But what you can see is that it's got a beautiful native forest that's very mature. This is a part of the territory that gets really hot, but this place has a lot of shade and stays comfortable and cool throughout the day, so kids can be here all day, and anyone in the community can be here all day. But I just wanted you to start getting a feel for it. This is Totumo. And this is an aerial view of the community kitchen. So you can just see, and the outdoor classroom that's under that roof. One of our ideas for Totumo is to transition it off-grid, and we see potential for maybe putting solar panels on this roof. But we don't want to cut down any trees, so if we did solar electricity production, we'd do it there. So just so you can start to see, we're thinking of lots of things, and we're not quite sure what we're going to do. But it's filled with potential, and literally, Penny and I signed the deed yesterday. This is like, we thought it was going to be sold and someone had cut down all the forest and built a big house here. And now it's going to continue as a community learning center and our future home. And so it's part of the ecosystem. Here's a picture of the ruins, Las Ruinas, which is, as you can see, it's an abandoned house. And here in Barichara, people pride themselves on the kind of hand-built earthen construction for all the houses in Barichara, which is part of why it's so beautiful. So as the house was abandoned, eventually the house collapsed and was eroded away. And now the ruins are all that's left. And this is a space that's about an acre in size. And we think it's the perfect location for Sueños del Bosque for the long term. And I'll talk in a little bit about how we see this land coming into the commons, because right now it's owned by the association that owns Bioparque Moncora, but it's been abandoned, and it's part of a culturally limited area, because the town of Barichara is a national monument, where you're limited in construction, that the only things you could build on this land must have a recreational purpose, which means you can't build a house there, but you can build a restaurant or a school. And so we're going to see if we can build a school there and have a relationship with the owners of the Bioparque to weave Sueños del Bosque with the 6 hectares of land above it that are a community forest. Here is Las Ruinas from the air. So you can see that it's a nice open piece of land. It's relatively flat. What we imagine that we would do here, if we are able to get this land, is that we would construct some kind of a community kitchen, probably compost toilet, indoor, outdoor classroom spaces, something like ecologically designed, light footprint kind of construction. And it's right on the edge of town, so we could easily attach, electricity and water, anything like that in terms of infrastructure, we could do quite easily. And on the left of the dotted line is the beginning of Bioparque Moncora. So you don't just think of this as this is the land of the school, think of it as this is the land for the school, because this is Bioparque Moncora. Everything you see in those big squares and everything to the left all the way to the cliff and the ruins is right there in the bottom left. So you can see that really the school of Sueños del Bosque would be the entire Bioparque. And that we would just place the sort of the main access point and infrastructure in Las Ruinas. And so we're starting a negotiation to get this land long-term at a very low price in a long-term partnership with the association that owns the Bioparque. And we see this as a fundamental building block for the learning ecosystem, because it would basically establish a children's Waldorf school as the entry point to the Bioparque between the town and the community forest. And a lot of tourists go through here. A lot of local community members go and walk on the trails. Bioparque Moncora is this beautiful, incredible place. And we're working on strengthening the relationship to a Centropic agroforestry demonstration site. I've been building a food forest as a permaculture practice for 3 years in part of the Bioparque. We've already been funding the people who do maintenance and the reforestation work for almost 4 years in the Bioparque through other mechanisms. So we see Las Ruinas as the anchor for bringing a school to the Bioparque, which we think would just be transformative for the whole territory. And then, like I said, Sueños del Bosque right now is at the Maloca. You can see one of the Maloca buildings in the back in this picture, the kind of, straw hut structure that it is, with beautiful space indoors. And the Maloca was actually built to be like a restaurant, but the business failed, and the people who owned it were trying to figure out what to do. Right now, I think they have 3 classrooms that are semi-outdoor, meaning they have roofs and walls, but open space. There's a set of monolithic structures like Stonehenge. They've been starting a community garden, and there's an industrial kitchen and restaurant. And right now, Sueños del Bosque is using that massive space, and we're starting to invite things like we did the summer solstice celebration that happened a couple of weeks ago was at this site. And Sueños del Bosque is now expanding to have a community coordinator in addition to the Waldorf teachers, so that we can organize community events in the Maloca and create more engagement with the school and bring more people into the community of learning with us as well as bringing people from the outside. So the Maloca is a beautiful, incredible place. We're paying something like $500 per month to rent it as part of the operating expenses of Sueños del Bosque. And we have only been there as a school since June 1st, like, 5 weeks. So it's a new home for Sueños del Bosque, but it's already a really beautiful, dynamic space that we're going to stay in at least until the end of the year and maybe longer, just depending on what happens. But I wanted you to get a feel for it because it's in another part of the territory. It's the current home of the Waldorf School, and it's connected to this territorial network. And then I just wanted to mention Origen del Agua for those of you who aren't familiar with it. This is an aerial photo taken from drone in 2022. No, I'm sorry, 2021. This picture was taken in 2021. We've actually, in the last 3 years, have done a lot of reforestation work. Here at the bottom, those buildings you see in the bottom, that is a campesino school for the neighboring town of Villanueva. And in the last 2 years, after we built a canay, which is a structure with a roof for a tool shed, but it's also an outdoor classroom. Once we built the canay, there was a place with shelter so the kids could be outdoors. And then we started collaborating with this school. So we have a 2-year history of working with the campesino school on Origen del Agua to teach them reforestation. And these are all children from this part of the territory, campesino kids that are learning native ecology, permaculture, watershed restoration, reforestation, syntropic agricultural practices. The children of the school, which are elementary school kids, are learning all of this at Origen del Agua because the land is on the edge and adjacent to the school. So Origen del Agua, they've developed education programs. Sueños del Bosque has brought its kids to Origen del Agua for workshops. I raised the money to buy Origen del Agua back in 2020 with crowdfunding money. And so it's an anchor in the territory for regenerative education and reforestation work. And so it's just another place-based element of our education fund. So I wanted you all to see it. Now what I want to talk about is, why am I describing land as the basis of education? It's because a big focus for us in the next year is to do 2 things: to bring the human mind into the earth, which is basically change the way people think and feel and how they relate to their landscapes, so people feel like they're part of nature. And we want to also bring land into the commons. And as we're doing both of these things, they're both educational processes. People have to decolonize their minds about land management and land ownership, and people need to decolonize their minds about the human relationship to landscapes and the human relationships to nature. And this is where education and land management come directly into relationship with each other. And this is where I want to talk about Tierra Sagrada Barichara, which is the new nonprofit that we're creating, and how it relates to 3 of the pieces of land that I just talked about. So the idea is we're creating a new Colombian nonprofit. The legal structure is called a corporación, or a corporation, which is confusing for those who are not in Colombia, because a corporación is basically a foundation. Think of it as like a philanthropic foundation, except that it allows you to have a formal structure for membership, which means that the mission of this organization is to bring land into the commons, but it's a member-based organization where local people can be the legal guardians of the land. So what we're doing is creating a member-based organization with formal structure for membership so that the members who become members of this organization must act in service to the mission of the organization. And the mission is to bring land into the commons. And I'm going to give 3 examples of how we're doing that with these 3 different pieces of land. This organization doesn't exist. The statutes were written yesterday and we're revising them, which means sometime in the next couple of weeks, we'll submit the paperwork to the Chamber of Commerce and legally constitute. Penny and I will be the co-founders, and then we'll start inviting people to be members. So this is like hot off the presses. It hasn't even quite happened yet, is how new it is. But the idea is that in some cases, the land will be donated to the organization, and Tierra Sagrada will receive the land title and hold them in trust for the community. Whether it's in the form of a land trust legally or not is a bit of a question because Colombia's laws are structured differently than the laws of Europe and North America. But basically, the trust of the community will be connected to the management of the land, but the legal ownership of the land will be with the nonprofit, which means the nonprofit will function like a community land trust. And that also this organization is going to specialize in creating community agreements. So not only will we receive land to bring it into the commons, but we'll also have legal counsel. We'll have legal expertise and facilitation skill to help people convert their land into the commons. Let me just give you 3 concrete examples of this so you can see how it works. And oh wait, also that it'll help set up customized governance for each plot of land. So let me show you with 3 examples. With Origen del Agua, we raised $50,000 in crowdfunding and bought this land in 2020, but it's legally owned by my ex-wife and myself, because at the time we didn't have an organization to put it in. So one of the things that we'll do with Origen del Agua is after Tierra Sagrada has been legally constituted, we're going to donate the land to the organization. Which means my ex-wife, Jessica, and I will sign over the papers to give the land to Tierra Sagrada. We'll also write the social and ecological mission for Origen del Agua as an agreement between Tierra Sagrada and whoever governs or gives oversight to the project itself. And in this case, Origen del Agua has a social mission of demonstrating how heavily degraded land can be restored. It has a social mission of educating children through curriculum development and learning programs. It has an ecological mission of restoring soils, water, and forest as part of the Barichara River watershed and as part of the groundwater supply to the town of Barichara. So it has various social and ecological dimensions. Then what we want to do is set up an oversight committee with local stakeholders. For example, Jessica, my ex-wife, she's the primary person doing work on the land, so she would be on this committee. Someone from that campesino school on the edge of Origen del Agua, the teacher, could also be on this committee. One of the teachers from Sueños del Bosque, our Waldorf school, could be on this committee. Other neighbors, other campesino neighbors, like the family we bought this land, they could be on this committee. And you would end up with local stakeholder representation, local people who are the guardians collectively for the land of Origen del Agua while it is legally owned by Tierra Sagrada. And you can see that this structure functions like a community land trust. So that's what we're thinking about doing for Origen del Agua as soon as the organization is constituted. When you look at Las Ruinas, it's a different situation. Is that we need to negotiate agreements about the access to this land for the Sueños del Bosque school. Why do we need to negotiate agreements about it? Because the land is not going to be donated to Tierra Sagrada. We basically have 2 options right now. We can raise the money to buy Las Ruinas, or for a much lower price, we can solve a financial problem of the association, Aquí Leopada, that owns the land, which is that they have taxes on this land. They have taxes for the bioparque, and they have no mechanism for raising money. So they have this accumulation of debt to the local mayor, to the local town. And so the agreement we're talking about, we're starting a conversation, is that we would raise the money to pay off their back taxes for the entire bioparque. We would create an agreement that we would have use of this land for a long period of time. We might start with 10 years, we might start with 20 years, but basically that we would have the right to access this land for a long enough period of time that we could raise the money to construct a school on Las Ruinas. So the land would legally remain with Aquí Leopada, but we would create an agreement for long-term access to the land for Sueños del Bosque. And then, just like with Origen del Agua, we would set up an oversight committee with local stakeholders. So in this case, one of the stakeholders would be Sueños del Bosque. Another stakeholder might be our territorial foundation, Barichara Regenerative. Another stakeholder would be the association, Aquí Leopada. And then another stakeholder would be the people who manage the bioparque. There are 2 women, Camila and Vicky. Maybe they would both be on this committee too. And we would customize the creation of a local stakeholder group to be the stewards of Las Ruinas to manage the relationship between education, the bioparque, and the community. And this would be the work of Tierra Sagrada to do this. Now, when we look at Totumo, it's different again. Because what we need to do right now, which we're going to start in August, is Penny and I are going to organize a dreaming circle with the community, which means we're going to organize a community event. We're going to invite all of the families who sent their kids to Totumo in the last 9 years. We're going to invite neighbors on land near Totumo and other people who are interested in creating education projects on Totumo. And we're going to dream together. We're going to facilitate a process. What do you dream of doing here? What would you like to do? What would you like to do? And so that we can weave the land into community processes and weave community processes into the land. Initially, the land is going to remain in stewardship by us. What that means is right now, Penny and I own the land. And we're not sure if we'll donate the land to Tierra Sagrada, but we might donate it in the future. So for now, we want to create community agreements so that we guarantee the community and the ecological benefits of Totumo, even if we remain the owners. Which means, again, we need to set up a different oversight committee with different stakeholders. In this case, we might have someone from Sueños del Bosque. We might have someone from the Huerta Comunitaria, which is a community garden of syntropic agriculture that's in the same rural zone. We might have teachers from other campesino areas in the territory. We might have other education initiatives. Like there's a beautiful network called Fundación Mujer y Vida, Woman and Life, that organizes lots of learning exchanges between women throughout the countryside that might use this community kitchen. Basically, we want to create another stakeholder group that can be guardians of the community learning processes for Totumo. And Tierra Sagrada would become an expert in facilitating this customized process for different pieces of land throughout the territory, starting with these 3 pieces of land. And so now when we talk about the Regenerative Education Fund, we actually need to increase the amount. We need to try and raise at least $150,000 for 2025, because that would allow us to secure the land Las Ruinas. Las Ruinas, the back taxes cost about $50,000. And so if we raise $50,000, we can have long-term access to the future home of Sueños del Bosque without buying the land. And also we're increasing the operating expenses of Sueños del Bosque because we need to do more community engagement, communication and outreach, and fundraising. And so we're looking at how we adapt the budget as we're learning and growing. And so we're increasing the budget for 2025. In 2024, Sueños del Bosque needed about $50,000. With the way we're thinking of the budget now, it really needs something more like $60,000. Not a lot more, but a little more. So we're adjusting the budget as we're learning and looking at how the education fund can try to fund all of these initiatives for an entire year from where we are now, for about $150,000. And so now when we talk about this regenerative finance lab, I just want to name some of the strategies we can explore, because this can become part of our discussion, which is we've already talked a little bit about social business investors. I mentioned very briefly 2 weeks ago that we've created this thing called the Better Than Carbon Offsets program, because 2 socially minded businesses in Germany, just through my LinkedIn connections, I didn't ask them, I didn't advertise this. They just came up to me and said, we have a carbon offset program. We don't trust it. Can we donate our money to Sueños del Bosque instead? And we're like, yes, please. So one of our strategies could be to build a network of social businesses to donate their money into this education fund. And you can see how that strategy could be replicated in other bioregions as well. Then there's the idea of strategic philanthropy. Who are the education funders in the philanthropic world that would love to support this work and love to support learning exchanges to share this work with other territories? So that's another place we could focus as a group in this design lab. We also want to build a donor support network, people who donate money as individuals, $50, $500, $1,000 into the Regenerative Education Fund, and they accompany the process, learning with us. Maybe they come to Barichara to visit, maybe they just attend the sessions like this one we're having today, but that they donate money as individuals, which is another kind of structure we could build for other landscapes. And then the 4th one I see is live immersion events. 2 years ago, in October of 2022, we did an event called Refi Barichara, where we invited about 65 or 70 people from the Web3 crypto world. And they came for 5 days, and we immersed them in regenerative projects, and we did design work together, and it brought money to local people in the community, and it was beautiful. What if we do live immersions at Totumo? What if we do live immersions at the Bioparque? What if we do world school events to pay for Sueños del Bosque? Basically thinking of different ways of bringing people from around the world to Barichara so that we can raise funding by people paying to attend the events, but also invite those people to join the donor support network or to invite the businesses that they work for. You get the idea, is that live immersion events can help us build relationships with people who become long-term supporters of this work. So these are some of the strategies we might play with here in this finance lab. And then we just start moving forward. So as you can see, the learning ecosystem is really starting to emerge. You can see already that there are ways these different pieces of land relate to each other. And there are ways we can systematically build these relationships to make them stronger at the territorial scale. And that's what the Regenerative Education Fund will do, is focus on education processes connected to different parts of the landscape. And so that's it. I'd love to have a conversation with you all about it and hear your thoughts. So just love to open the floor to anyone who has questions or comments. What's bubbling up for you? What are the questions you have? What are the insights you're getting? What do you think we should do as a group? Anything, like, let's have a conversation.
Hey, Joe. Hey, everyone. I'm curious, like, I'm really fascinated by the way in which you're thinking about weaving the school into the community school that's already there, and wondering, like, do you have a sense of like the demographics of school-aged kids in terms of how they're distributed in the region and where they are going to school, if they are? I'm just thinking about it from the perspective of, building a critical mass so that, the kind of education process itself can reach.
That's a great question. We have a pretty good understanding of that. Between Barichara and the neighboring towns, there are about 15,000 people, where Barichara has about 7,000, so it's the biggest. And then like Guane, which has 200 people, so it's really tiny. Villanueva that has maybe 2,000 or 3,000 people. So within 10 kilometers in a circular radius, with Barichara at the center, there are about 15,000 people. And there are, if I remember correctly, there are 18 veredas or rural zones. So every vereda should have a public school. And I know the two places that are the poorest in education are the Vereda El Pino and the Vereda that is called Buturegua, which is also a little town, where they have like a little school with half a dozen kids and almost no materials. It's like, sometimes they don't even have drinkable water on site. It's like there's asbestos in the public schools in Barichara. There's like problems like this, right? And the majority of kids go to the public schools, which are mostly terrible. They're mostly like draconian, militaristic, Catholic, top-down, patriotic, Colombian colonizer. Carolina may know about this if she went to Colombian schools as a kid, or Ricardo. But basically, some schools are good if you happen to have a good teacher, but those good teachers suffer terribly in how rigid these schools are. So the big opportunity for us is to change the mindset of the teachers in Barichara, and in parallel to support the schools in the countryside that have no resources. Like basically their schools are almost non-existent. Anything we can bring them will make them better. And so it's really easy to build relationships with those kids in those schools. But in the town itself, it's harder. But the beautiful thing is Bioparque Moncora, already the biggest school in town, the kids between 5th and 8th grade regularly, like once a week, go up and do activities in the Bioparque, where the teachers requested to work with the Bioparque, and they're doing a lot of work there. And so there's a beautiful relationship between the established schools with the Bioparque. So if we could bring Sueños del Bosque into the town and create more connections through community processes and curricula development, and then bring those curricula, like for example, there was a a girls' sexual reproduction education program that was being prototyped in the rural schools. But the woman who was leading it was one of those people that created conflicts with people, so it just collapsed. But if someone created a really good program, it would eventually get to the public schools. So I'd say there's a lot of potential, and it's a small town, so it's really easy to talk to people. Yeah,
you.
great question, John. Aletta, over to you.
Hi, Joe, Penny. Yes, I'm interested. Firstly, what kind of distances are you talking about that these kids are traveling between? I mean, I see now that I can't pronounce the names, but the park is right next to town. But like Tutumo is now how far from town is that? How do were the kids getting there that were going there? And now the new school, how are the kids getting there?
Yeah, Totumo is about 2 kilometers, a little over a mile away from town. And what we did is we just hired a bus. We had a local tuk-tuk driver who had a bus, like a big van that hold maybe up to 15 kids. And we just paid them monthly, something like $100 a month to be the driver. And then during
and the new site for the school, the new
site for the school right now, it's the parents are coordinating amongst each other. And we organize the route each morning among the families, because Sueños del Bosque is sort of a blend between multifamily homeschooling and a Waldorf school, sort of a blend. So like today we have part of Sueños del Bosque is we have a trainer of Waldorf teachers that we're paying to teach the teachers. So the teachers like, I'm trained for 2nd grade, but not for 3rd grade. Well, we'll be sure they're trained for 3rd grade before the kids arrive to that age level. But we're also creating a mamas and papas school. Something that Waldorf does is teaching the parents how to be part of the pedagogy, because it's so different from other kinds of schools. So we have all this weaving with the entire families. And that means that the opportunity for transport, for community cooking, for what's called in Colombia minga, which is like a barn raising, everyone comes together and does a work day. All that stuff beautifully happens in a kind of community homeschooling way. And that's how we're organizing transport right now.
The other question I had is, it sounds to me like in Colombia, you don't have huge government pressures in terms of having to follow a national curriculum. Here we are having huge opposition. Even the Waldorf schools are really struggling. So I was just wondering, how free are you? Very free there to go ahead and create these alternative educational systems?
Yeah, Colombia is really good with homeschooling. So like, how you can just basically, there's a test you take each year that verifies that you're meeting the education standards like you would do in homeschooling in other countries. That infrastructure exists here, which creates a lot of flexibility for these alternatives. The main barrier for people is once a child gets to be 8 years old, they are required to be in school, or to enter the school, they have to take a test. So you could homeschool your kid and not register it, and you wouldn't really have a problem because no one would know. But if your kid's like 10 years old and you decide to put them in the public school, you'd have to take a test to show that they're eligible. So even if you weren't following the homeschooling standards, you would still have to meet them in that way. And the challenges come when you try to certify a school. Which this is the same, I'd say it's parallel to other places. Like if our Waldorf school decides to say, we want to attract the parents that require us to be certified because they need that security, then we're gonna have much more restrictions on our curriculum. Which is different from, well, we're just gonna demonstrate through a homeschooling certification, family by family, but not at the level of the school. Look, my kid is meeting the standards. And so that's gonna be a discussion among the families, which route we're gonna go, because it's a big strategic question for us. And right now the school's too young for us to know which way to go. But there's a region of Colombia that has the oldest and longest history for these kinds of schools, just San Rafael, it's where Catalina is right now. For about 25 or 30 years, they've been doing Waldorf and Montessori schools. That a lot of this has been figured out in other parts of Colombia. And actually, we've recruited almost all of our teachers for Sueños del Bosque were in San Rafael before. All of them except for Jonathan, who just came from Cali. But all the rest of them are from there because, it's like permaculture. It's a small world, right? Like there are these places where everyone goes. And so all of the things we need to know about how to connect are going to be there. Oh, I think we just lost Aletta. Uh-oh.
Oh,
But yeah, anyway, to say we're figuring it all out. Other questions and comments?
Well, something that came to mind while you were chatting there about possible certification and credibility within the school as well is what are the schools that are doing well in the area? And I know a lot of homeschooling institutions in the States and in North America will often partner with a certain school, or they'll create a certain school just to make sure that the homeschoolers have access to resources and funding and those types of things, because it opens it up so they can get different certification, different credibility for the different programs. And so essentially you could just allow the schools to operate as more programs, and then you have these other more established schools that have credibility already and are certified in different ways. You kind of blend the use, I guess, because you're already working with some of the schools, it sounds like, with the one land, the parque, right? Yeah. And so if you find the right partnerships there, maybe you can piggyback on some of the certifications that they've already have and the credibility they've established.
It's a great idea. One of the schools here, it's about 20 years old. It's called Fundo Reserva, and it's a foundation. So they're set up as a nonprofit, and they offer kindergarten through 12th grade, and they're certified. And so there is a school that is somewhere between a public school and a truly alternative school. And it's probably the best school that's here, even though it doesn't go nearly as far as we want to go. But I think those kinds of relationships can definitely be explored and developed. I think it's a great idea. Ari, please.
Hello. Thank you for this. Yeah, it's wonderful to be part of this seedling of a conversation. And I just, I have a bunch of questions, but I guess one question that's really top of mind is you've been so thoughtful and careful and transparent sort of about how you're doing governance and how you're raising money and how you're structuring ownership. And so I want to know who's your lawyer and who's your accountant and how can we borrow them for our work? Because not everybody has the nuanced appreciation for all the newness in the models that you're designing, right? And so like for those of us trying to do this in other parts of the world, it's hard to even know where to begin to find people with that sensitivity. So that's one question. But also, as I'm, you've got such an incredible command, Joe, of how you're doing all of this, but there are a lot of threads here. And so one thing that I can feel happening in my body is like, whoa, how are you keeping this all straight? Especially given that, you too, and, there's ownership that's private, part of it's private and private, part of it's public. And how do you sort of manage the, I guess the trust building and the optics around like what is yours and what is, more communally owned, and just building trust around all of that. I know transparency is a big part of that, but just I'm overwhelmed when I hear all the amount of details. I'm just wondering if you could speak to how do we do this in a way that is really ultimately building as much trust as possible.
So anything you want to say on that second one before I say something?
no, why don't you go ahead?
Okay. Maybe I'll cover the first question first and say, one of the brilliant things that Ana Maria did, Ana Maria is like her title is Dinamizadora. She's the catalyst.
Dynamizer.
Yeah, the dynamizer. In English, it translates more like catalyst. But basically, she has been a Waldorf teacher and done community homeschooling and community education in the whole town of San Rafael. She's like a wicked, awesome social entrepreneur. Her husband is also a wicked, awesome social entrepreneur in like economics. And so the two of them are just amazing. And they were homeschooling their kids. So she was already doing all of that. And she knew who to invite. So one of the first people she invited when we were looking for teachers was she invited this woman, Julie, and her husband, Juan, who have two twin 7-year-old boys that they've been homeschooling in the Waldorf model. And Julie is trained to be a Waldorf teacher, but was doing homeschooling. And I was like, Julie, would you like to maybe be one of our Waldorf teachers? And she's like, no, but I'd love to come and bring my kids. And now she's one of our assistants. We've hired her as an assistant because she's already, certified as a first and second grade teacher in Waldorf, or I guess she's working on the second grade, but she's been teaching her kids who are now 7. And so she was the one that was teaching my daughter when she came. Her husband, Juan, created an outdoor equipment company and is a world-class mountain climber. Has climbed on Everest and Yosemite and all this kind of stuff. And he's a lawyer who specializes in social enterprise. And he's Colombian. And so he's the one that wrote the statutes for us. He's like, and he knows about land conservation. He knows about the structure of the nature reserves. We could not have found a better Colombian lawyer than him. And he's the one that took the kids rappelling, the 5-year-old doing rappelling. And that's why Stefanski 2 weeks ago, like, who are these amazing people? And that's just something Colombia does, is it has all these really amazing people. They're able to do this somehow. So Juan is our lawyer, and he's also an outdoor education specialist. He has created outdoor adventure programs for kids. And so it's super cool. But he also speaks English really well. So we can ask him to come and talk to him about some of this, and he can share more.
We should.
Yeah, actually, I already planned to start inviting people to come to these sessions, and Juan would be wonderful to have because he's just really cool, as you can tell. But also he knows a lot about the problems that happen with nature reserves in Colombia. Something like 90% of biodiversity protection in Colombia happens through private nature reserves on private land, which means there are huge problems with how do you set up governance so it actually works. It's the main reason conservation doesn't happen in Colombia is that local people just take it on themselves, but they don't actually know how to protect themselves legally because they don't have a lawyer like Juan. So we need to actually make this available to the nature reserves of Colombia, of which there are thousands of private nature reserves in Colombia. People can convert their land into nature reserves. And there's a kind called a civil society nature reserve, which basically turns your land into a B Corp. You can define social and ecological benefits and tie it to your land. So like I said, Colombia has really good legal structures. So the trust building question is huge. And I would say the most important thing I've done is I do messy work in public. That's the most important thing I've done. I've been accused of everything you can imagine. I'm a drug dealer. I do satanic rituals with kids. I've been accused of it all by the local people here, right? It's just something that happens. But because I do all of my work in the open and it's messy, including a psychopath donated money to buy a huge piece of land and then stole it from the community last year. And this huge conflict. It was supposed to be the home of our ecoversity. And so we've had really nasty conflicts, but it's all in the open. And so our way of building trust is just people see me walking around with a pickaxe, digging holes with mud on my clothes. Everyone loves my daughter because she's just a little beam of light. Elisa's like a beam of sunshine. So everyone in the town loves the kid and they see what kind of dad I am. And I think that those are actually the two biggest things. It's not what is the work or how is it being done. Is this crazy gringo a good crazy or a bad crazy? And when people see me with my kid, we stand out. Look, I look like a white pirate. We stand out. My daughter was the cute little blonde who's now the cute little brown-haired girl. And everyone knows who she is. So, and she's really social. And so, so I think my secret superpower is my daughter.
But also, I feel like it's also consistency over time, consistently showing up in the community over a long period of time. So the campesinos start to notice that, and also there's a lot of work on trauma healing happening within this territorial foundation. And outside the territorial foundation, just, and like what he said, Mujer Vida and other places within the foundation itself. So there's a lot of that work happening as well, and that's a big deal. It's decolonizing ourselves, but also in the community as well. They've all been colonized here, so in pretty brutal ways.
Yeah, there's an organization here called Corazoma, which translates into English as heart body. Corazon and Soma, it's like putting your body and your heart together. And it's a group of women who are therapists and medicinal plant practitioners, depending on which person. And mostly they focused on trauma healing with women, not entirely, but about 80% of it. And they've been doing that for like 20 years. So we arrived into a context of these very powerful healers and the work that they do. There's a lot of domestic violence in rural places everywhere on earth, including here. And so, just those kinds of problems. And I don't know how much the story Carrie, but Barichara was the most violent place during the violence in Colombia. Because neighbors were killing neighbors for 40 years as clan-based violence. They constructed their own peace. And it was the men who did it. It's almost always the women. Everywhere on earth, it's like 95% of the time it's the women who do the peace building. And Barichara was the men. And so these really strange things about this place that make it possible to build trust just by showing up and doing the work for long enough, like you said, for long enough.
Thank you so much for that. And just out of curiosity, I have a bigger question, which I'm happy to hold if somebody else has the question. But is that peacemaking experience, was that documented anywhere that I could learn more about, or is it just more oral history?
The video.
Oh, actually, yeah, let me grab you a YouTube video that you will love.
Okay.
Because there's a
Thank
local
you.
team that does territorial dialogues and documentaries, and they teach
And I
teenage.
speak Spanish in case it's not translated.
It's in Spanish, but it's got English subtitles too. So
Okay.
everyone can watch it. This video is called La Paz Anónima, the anonymous peace.
Cool.
And the man who
Amazing.
made it, his wife, he actually, both of them work with about 8 or 9 different campesino schools, and they have a community theater, and they teach photography and filmmaking and theater, and they do landscape restoration. Like I said, Colombians are crazy cool. But Oscar, who made this video, his father was like between the two clans instituting the violence, family-based violence. His father was like the head honcho of one of the sides. And so when he made this documentary, his father's passed away, but he interviewed his mother. He's like, oh wait, my dad helped build the peace, but my dad was one of the most violent people. What happened? And so La Paz Anónima is an amazing documentary about, it's like 2 years old. It's pretty recent. He wanted to interview people before they pass away. So he captured the story of the peace building process. It's pretty amazing. Yeah. So I guess the thing I want to bring into the conversation now is this idea that we can do work together in this space as a finance lab, which is to say, one thing that we need to do for Barichara is we have some money we need to raise, some supports we need to build for Barichara. So there's like work to do for the local place. But then also from the side of like the design school and what we're doing in the design school, where we want to create the capacity for ongoing exchanges of learning between different bioregions. And so one thing we're moving toward is these 4 territories that Penny and I are going to be in a position of bringing funding to support them in creating funding ecosystems, but then also learning from each other. And so one thing that I know is going to be really important is storytelling. Another thing that's going to be really important is relationship building. Another thing that's really important is just innovation and practicing innovation. Like who are the networks of people that would want to be part of this and learn from it, and then bring what they're learning to other places? What kinds of partnerships would make sense? How would we go about doing this? What are the things you're already doing that that could help us in Barichara, that if you ever like came here, you're like, I get to be a part of it, that's super cool. Or you're like, well, I just, I could donate money and help, or, that personal level. Or I'm doing this other kind of work, and I really think my work could benefit from having this as a case study, or having connections to people that could come and speak to us about it, or that I could like send people from my business to for a retreat and they'd learn about it. Just like there's so many ways to think about the relationships. And so I'd love to just start a conversation about just for each of us personally, how do you want to be a part of this? You can attend these sessions and go, wow, this is cool, I learn a lot, and I think that's great. But then also there's like, what do you want to do here? And I want to be really open, like what do we want to do depends on what you want to do. So I can't over prescribe it, I have things I could ask for, but that's way less interesting. So I'd like to figure out what are the openings here, things that we can do together. So yeah, the stage is, the floor is for whomever would like to share. And no pressure either.
I'm really excited just about the bioregional restoration and regeneration that you guys are doing, and the frame that you're taking from education, especially education of our children and the children in the area, which is really, really cool. There's also the side of the economics and the economy of the area as well, and that's something that I love the thought of doing a finance lab. I noticed that the financing is largely donation or philanthropy in that regard, but I'm also wondering in what ways can this group and the Barichara community kind of come together to figure out what can drive a really strong economic engine. Because especially the schooling of the younger of our younger generation should be really more ingrained with philanthropy and more ingrained with donation and building up that way. It shouldn't be really more a for-profit entity and driving economy that way. But Barichara in general should have a really strong regenerative economy flourishing from children being taught how to regenerate this area and then also be able to create livelihood for themselves as they grow generationally into their place, right? So I'm curious in wanting to explore that as well in this kind of finance lab that and space that you're creating. I'll just leave it as that, but that's something that's been coming up for me.
Just quickly name, I didn't talk about Casa Común or other things. There's actually a major regenerative economy part of what's going on here. That, like Carrie said, it gets overwhelming if you say too many things.
Also the new mayor.
But yeah, we also have the first non-mafia mayor probably in Barichara's history. We have a mayor who actually wants to do something. So we can actually work with the local government. But I just want to name that at the level of our territorial foundation, we are about to launch 4 parallel funds. One of those is regenerative economy, and the person we're recruiting to lead it, and I actually think we're going to use design school funds to pay him, is Felipe, the husband of Ana Maria. Ana Maria is the catalyst of Sueños del Bosque. Her husband, Felipe, who's a social entrepreneur of business model design, he's really good at that. He's doing a lot of work with Casa Común. And we're probably going to have him work for our territorial foundation to design a regenerative economy fund, which I could see as a beautiful bridge to the education fund. And one of the 2 things I think could be really powerful business model design opportunities are alternative models of education that generate revenue and alternative models of tourism, which are not that different from each other really. But to say like we could have a world school event that funds things for the school, but people pay for it, and that's like a for-profit activity sort of. You know, like you can get in an in-between space. So I think there's a really beautiful bridge between education and design of economy. And then in addition, there's a lot of stuff going on with the economy that I just didn't talk about today, but that is also going on. Ricardo.
Yeah, thank you, Joe. Almost almost 2 years ago, taking part in the Refi Barichara, it was so inspiring, to see here in this part of the world that all these projects were really working and going on. So it was a seed that it was just planted, and the direction I wanted to take in the restoration work I was doing at that time. I just opened my eyes to the different places where I have some relationships, like Mogotes, Cucuta in the Catatumbo bioregion, and the place that I'm living actually, and the place that I store here in Venezuela. So for me, the feeling of loneliness, and the struggle of, being the first that's trying to make the call in the community and in the, in the place is sometimes hard. So, these real spaces of exchange and learning are very important to keep the moral up, and expecting that we can really exchange our resources, time, and our learning in finances, because that's an issue that we all need to solve in order to make large scales restoration projects. So it is very important for me to have the showcase of Barichara. Cascadia is great, but it seems to be like another world, really, for us here. It's just like, I mean, there are learning opportunities, you know what I mean, but it's just like another context. So, Barichara is like the spear, of what can be done here. So it is important to keep up with the work you're doing. So, well, thank you. Thank you.
Gracias,
Joe and
hermano.
Penny.
Gracias.
Mhm.
Carrie, please.
So I would second Joshua's point as well. But so you mentioned there are four funds that you're going to be launching in parallel, and I think you mentioned these ones before, but kind of forgotten. So economy, education, and could you just mention briefly the other two?
Yeah, there's the restoring the waters, restoring the rivers. So
Uh-huh.
the organizing of the watershed restoration at scale. And then the fourth one is territorial healing.
Right. Okay.
Mm.
So I guess in terms of, there's, to your point, there's so much potential in this specific part of the I think this fits into the bioregional learning center learning journey, right?
Yeah.
I mean, okay. So
Definitely. It's not formally part of it in the sense that we don't want to give people too much they need to participate, but as you can see, this is how you build one, is like this.
right.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I guess a couple things that I would be interested in, contributing and or relating about, maybe case studies is the most basic way to think about it. Is the model for how you're building the lab, like what is the regenerative finance lab and how do you do it, and contextualize it appropriately. And then also on the tourism piece, how do you do regenerative tourism? Those are both threads that relate to the work that I'm doing through both the Global Regenerative Finance Initiative and then also more broadly in partnership with another collaborator on tourism. But I guess a question, you know, and when in the GRFI, when we think about regenerative finance, there's two things that we're thinking about that hopefully seem complementary. But one is really thinking about this. I mean, the momentum you're building here is about like, it's real, it's tangible, it's concrete, it's near term. And part of the conversation that we're having is like, what is what is the 7 generation vision? So I would love to collaborate or think about that together, if that's relevant. And then importantly, gathering resources, be they, financial capital or other forms of capital, figuring out how to illustrate that, how to illustrate the abundance of different forms of capital in the regenerative finance process. So it's not just strictly money, is also something we're interested in being able to document. And then finally, really the fundamental tools of finance itself, right? So right now, what's missing from modern finance is, everything's been externalized. So how do we create the literal tools of finance, meaning how do we change the definition of finance so that we're not talking about the time value of money or the internal rates of return or the very detailed specific tools of finance that allow for it to become so reductionist in the first place. And so creating a body of work in finance that allows us to accommodate the externalities in the way we calculate returns on investment and value is maybe the tiny niche that we're trying to explore. And so if that's useful or interesting, then that's also something that I would love to work together on.
Well, I'm immediately thinking of two things. One is to create some kind of a case study or some kind of a template model, like a process model to say, oh, this is what you're doing with the finance lab. Say, we're doing a finance lab on Barichara, but here's how we would turn it into a finance lab for someone else. So, and we could practice that in the design school, or you could practice it somewhere else. Like there are plenty of places where people are trying to do this. So that could be a really fun topic for us, that we could just have like a one-on-one conversation to create some clarity around, like you would say, I would actually want to do this project, and I either am resourced or I would need these resources. Like we could have a conversation like that. Then the other part that was really coming up for me as tangible is another kind of case study, which is actually to do a case study on one element or some appropriate part of what we talked about today. Like if you were to look at the return on investment with a multi-capital kind of a context for Totumo, or for Oriente del Agua, or for the School Sueños del Bosque, and you're like, oh, and for that, you might actually come to Barichara and say, like, I'm going to spend a couple of weeks here and interview people and really learn this, or I'm going to come to one of the events and watch what happens, and I'm going to create a case study from it to show the multi-capital flows as a demonstration. That's another kind of thing that could be really valuable, that would also help us with fundraising and relationship building for the work, but would give a tangible product that you could create to be the case study. So those things come to mind right away, without getting into something like how we're building a community currency in Casa Común, and that there are already 100 producers doing exchanges with local products. So there's an alternative economy there that's further along than what we're talking about right now. And so depending on where you'd want to enter in, that would be, again, coming here and meeting some of the people and really mapping some of it out. And then at the level of tourism, there's the exchanges between the territories. Like we've already talked about a regenerative tourism route that would take people to Barichara, to Monte de Maria up north, to Santa Marta, to Putumayo, to Medellin, to Cali, where we have territorial foundations that are organizing locally. You can imagine a regenerative tourism route in Colombia would be freaking amazing, because most people outside of Colombia still don't know what Colombia is. They think it's narco traffickers, and that is starting to change. But if people really knew how much cultural and biological diversity there is here, the regenerative tourism would, it could usurp Costa Rica very quickly for its reputation. Because it deserves it. It deserves it more than Costa Rica.
I think it does.
Yeah.
I mean, I would, from what I'm recognizing, just being here in Panama in the middle of those two and just kind of seeing, it is kind of cool to see just how very passionate and how much they're fighting in Colombia for it. And Costa Rica hasn't really fought for it in the same way I think Colombia has, and you could kind of see it just in the culture for sure. And Panama is just, I feel like, really far behind and culturally wanting to. I mean, the recent protests that were even radicalized in a way with the mines here in Panama were so needed, and I think it was an opening of minds of like people valuing. I mean, they were chanting Oro Verde all through the country. Like Panama's gold is green, Panama's gold is green all over the country. That's like the first time I've ever seen anything on that level. But I do see Colombia. That would be really cool to see the tourism. I just wanted to second Carrie's, like I think there's so much need to be able to see these type of and I have a hypothesis that the challenges in regenerative or in finance in general has been we're trying to finance each individual business and each individual product and those types of things instead of the bioregional needs, the industry needs towards regeneration. And are there ways, and a lot of times it's the entrepreneur trying to, pitch to funders and whatnot, but it really can be and should in a lot of ways. I don't like to shit on anybody, but a desire would for me would be to see us in this conversation and in many other conversations bioregionally or even sector or vertical wise, start organizing on ways that we can come to groups of funding and finance and for entrepreneurs to group together or change makers to group together for specific bioregions and then come to the funding table, because that's when we see the holistic picture. That's when we can fund holistic pictures instead of funding this widget here, this widget there, that system there, and then it just becomes very scattered and all over the place and misdirected. Profit seeking, is really the only thing that you can get from that. So that's my hypothesis is if that I would love to try and that I'm trying to do with Seeds DAO is I'm trying to get funders together as many as I can together and see what their challenges are in funding projects that they want that are regenerative. And that's one thing that I'm starting to recognize and starting to validate as I'm speaking to them is that they don't necessarily want deal flow at this point. They want to know that what they're funding is validated, that it's moving towards something, and that groups like this that have done the work to validate why it's important to invest into these areas. That's what they want essentially. That's the thread I'm pulling on. At least I have to get further validation, but I'm starting to recognize that funders that are putting their money in regeneration, they don't want deal flow because there's plenty of people throwing deals at them. What they really want is people to do their due diligence well enough and to come together in a way that when they see this, they know what their money is actually doing and how it's regenerating, and the data can be put behind it, and case studies like this can be shown, right? So I would love to further validate that hypothesis of like, can we actually get regenerative finance to work from groups in bioregions and certain verticals to really find the funding that they need and do so in a way that's beneficial for investors and fund and for project owners and ecosystem builders at large. Chat.
Yeah, something you wanted to say? I know it's earlier. Thanks, Shifted.
No, but just sounds very aligned with the approach we're taking for sure. It's just exactly what we're about.
One thing we're doing in the next year, starting in September, is we're gonna work with probably the 4 places I mentioned: the Greater Takaranto bioregion in Ontario, Cascadia, the Forest of the Northeast, which is maps more or less to New England. And then the combination of Barichara and the Northern Andes Fund, the kind of Colombia level and Barichara level together, is to demonstrate that you can create a portfolio of projects organized around a geographic landscape system with local actors and local organizing. And then the deal flow is ecosystemic. It's like, oh, what you do is you fund an education fund. Why? Because it's already an ecosystem of actors. How do you know it's working? Well, look at all the ways you see it through social media, through sessions like this where you can have presentations, through different kinds of reports if they're needed, or other kinds of data documentation depending on what's being done. Photographs of trees growing is data. So, you end up with all kinds of validation by just having the human connection. And then when those things come up, you're like, oh, there's a big funder that would actually make $100 million, but we need this kind of data. And an investor says, oh, well, I'll fund the creation of the data gathering system. Like that sort of where people partner for a lot more than money. As I'm sure you're seeing this, Joshua, that the people who are bringing the money want to be part of the process. They want to be part of the story. And they're very conscientious about that. So yeah, I think this direction that we're holding right now of what kinds of, in a way, it's documentation and model building and model validating can we do as a group that would help with the storytelling of Barichara, and then also take the story to other places and take them to, especially as I think what Joshua was saying and what Carrie's been doing that hasn't been talked about quite as much here, is as you try to educate potential funders or impact investors how much they need to learn to be able to really understand what we're talking about. Some of them get it, but a lot of them still don't. And there's a whole education of that that needs to happen. So I think that feels really beautiful. And also just to say that part of the year of bioregional funding ecosystems for the design school, we're currently thinking it'll be February, but we haven't set any dates yet, is to do a design school immersion in Barichara and invite members of the design school to come here. And so, and then provide some financial support from the membership dues of the design school to help cover some of the travel costs for members to come. We can't pay for everyone, but, just try to help, that sort of thing. And so that's in our pipeline of thinking for the next year. But we can start building toward any of those elements in this group. Like what kind of storytelling, what kinds of models? Is it that we have little work groups like Carrie, you decide you really want to create a case study. So you become a project lead on a work group with 3 or 4 people. Like we as a group can just self-organize any way that makes sense to us. And those of us in Barichara will just be filled with gratitude to have the support here. Like that would really help. And then also if you have the means to come here, you're welcome to come at any time and meet people and see what's going on and connect to the work. Because that's been going on for 4 years now almost, that people have been coming. So yeah, and look, we're right at the scheduled time. This is nice. So are there any closing comments, anything that someone would like to say before we leave? Especially those of you who haven't said anything yet, if you'd like to share anything. Or Carolina, if you would like to share.
Yeah, I wanted to express my gratitude, and as a Colombian person, I feel happy that people like you have come and chosen, how do you say that? Chosen Colombia, chosen as a place to sow those seeds of regeneration. And so I feel just a lot of love and happiness about just to listen. And today I don't have comments or questions because I feel like I'm just absorbing and listening and feeling inspired, but it brings me a lot of hope. Yeah, a lot of hope, and that's very important. Yeah, so thank you so much for the work that you do.
Muchas gracias.
Yeah.
Anyone else like to share? Marie?
Yes, also, hello. Yeah, for me, it's a lot of learning still. It's more complex every time what's going on in Barichara. And for me is to see what we can apply and learn and get inspired in our work near Bogota. So yeah, also absorbing everything you said on many different levels, and be happy to exchange and share and learn from you.
Yeah, and we have work to do in the savannah of Bogota. Well, thank you, everyone. It's really such a pleasure for me to be able to hold this space. And you can all tell, like, I really care about the kids in Barichara. So just the thought that we can collaborate around these things, you know, very personally for my own daughter, but then also, like, you know, when you're in a community, you watch the kids grow up, it's amazing. I feel so much love for all the kids, and I feel so much potential for us to educate funders. Like this direction that came up in the conversation is not what I was thinking, and yet it makes perfect sense to me. I feel very aligned with it. And so I'll be thinking about it, and I would just invite any of you personally, like one-on-one, just send me a message and we can talk more. We could schedule a call. If there's something you'd like to bring into this group and present or lead, share, please. You know, like I said at the beginning, I'm still sort of in teaching mode of just giving context. But as we have a little more context together, then we can work together and work independently in parallel on different things that are meaningful to us. So, so I really like how some of that is already starting to come out. So if any of you'd like to talk more, just reach out. And thank you so much for being here today. Muchas gracias a todos.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you, Penny. Thank you, everybody. Ciao.
Gracias.
Bye.
Adiós.